The Association of Black Securities and Investment Professionals has welcomed Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba's budget speech. ABSIP says now is the time to build on these successes and create jobs for all. It also says more measures are needed to strengthen the labour market and economic growth. The association says it has become more important that progress made in the financial sector should be used as a tool for transformation. It adds it's abnormal that after 23 years of democracy, there are only a few black asset management companies. And we've extended the stay with Adil Nchabeleng, Transform RSA president, who's got vested interest, of course, in issues around transformation, as many of us do. And Zamo Madlala, Radical Economic Transformation Coalition, as the spokesperson. Good evening to both of you. Again, Zamo, let's just start in terms of the deconcentration of the financial services sector and where the proverbial low-hanging fruit are.
Good evening, Cindy, your panelists and the viewers. Well, when it comes to financial services and transformation, we can actually look at it from different points of view. You can look at the existing big companies that are there, and you look at individual black people that are employed within. And you find that the professionals themselves, they probably wouldn't come live on TV to say and speak out for themselves that they do not get the same treatment as their white counterparts in terms of senior management, middle management, etc. And then when you move on and you look at actually the black participation of the businesses within the market. I mean, recently we had an example where VBS was being taken to task for having been granted some minor investment. And now when you look, the PIC has purely only really been giving white asset management companies the right to actually invest on its behalf. Then you move on to the banking sector, and then I will ask you, in the last 24 years, other than VBS, which black banking license has been granted? Is it because there has been no application, or what's going on? And really this, we actually have to go and lay at government's door. Government has not gone out of its way to ensure that there is black participation within the capital financial sector whatsoever.
And the key problem, of course, as you're saying, it's essentially about access to opportunities. And if you have gatekeepers who want to maintain the status quo for self-preservation or because they are benefiting, how do you work around that, Zamo, in encouraging more players in the space?
Well, I believe the current finance minister, he actually showed the example that whilst he was public enterprises minister, they went out of their way to ensure that black auditing firms are given work. And hence now we have Susan Taluva as one of the big auditing firms. Konke has also come up. And the reason they were able to come up is because they had the work for them to go and employ the quality professionals to come and work within the business.
But it also took them a 30-year struggle. I mean, you know, do we have that luxury of time? As you're saying, there are one or two examples where big contracts have been given to black firms, but why are there only so a few after 24 years of democracy?
Because government has been apologetic about its mandate. They have not gone out of their way to ensure that blacks participate within the economy from the capital point of view. When you look at the structure of the economy, pre-94 and post-94, you found a lot of mergers. I mean, if you look at ABSA was made up of Volkskas, United Bank, and two other banks. That's what happened. They went and put out a consolidation such that they became so big that no one could come back into the industry and compete with these big players. So they are not really monopolies as such, but they are dominant, and no one can enter the space of their own weight.
Yeah.
So it's
Zamo, just stay on the line, I beg your pardon. Let's engage Adil Nchabeleng in the sense that there are now, the black formations are not united in a particular drive in the sense of economic transformation and how we penetrate the markets where there's been exclusion generally, especially in the financial services sector. If the Reserve Bank is not going to issue a license, and then we are told that if you have more competition, it would destabilize the economy, etc., all of that is just essentially anti-transformation talk. So where are the black formations then to dismantle all of that monopoly?
It's very strange when people speak about the black formation's absence. It's actually not a fact. You have a lot of stock fells. You have a lot of people who are consuming financial services, goods, products as well, who are actually black. Majority of the population in South Africa are black, are not white. You know, you have a population that is made up of over 80% of South Africa's population that consumes all related financial services, from life insurance to short-term insurance to banking services to looking at what you call healthcare-related services, which are all financial services, to the banks aspect of it. But yet, you have about 5 banks in South Africa, which is quite a contrast. Go to Kenya, for instance. There's 44 banks in a small country like Kenya. And we are a bigger country, given the fact that our population and all of other things that gives us an advantage. We should be having a competitive market by which people have a choice. If they don't feel that this bank looks after their interest, instead of having the monopoly that the banks holds currently, you can be a black group or a single organization.
But
which
hasn't
has
it been
ambitions.
lack of initiative as well? As you're saying, in the numbers, the black people are in the majority and the formations are there as well. How many of those have actually applied for a banking license, for example, Azamo, using the Stockfell community as a case in point?
Well, you know, that's a wonderful thing. You've got to look at how many hoops you've got to jump through before you even get that license. Never mind, I mean, the extent of the information you have to put together. I mean, I'm aware of certain things that I wouldn't put out here publicly because it's trade secret. But when you look at the process, I mean, I know one of the big banks that's probably going to come online soon, they've been at the process for the last 2.5 years to try and get a banking license in the country. It is not simple. It is not a matter of you fill out a couple of forms and then you're going to get a banking license. Hence, I say it goes back to government. That does government want to drive a mandate that says we want to spread the financial services of the country? I mean, you have BankServe, which is really represented by the Big Four. No one else within BankServe has got a voting say. Yes, they've welcomed other members, but that is the core of how our banking system in this country runs. So anybody else can say whatever, unless you are within that system where you are going to be able to get the clearing services, the actual reality of banking and how it's made. How you make your money in banking is by having the volumes and low fees. Now, if you do not have the low fees, you can come onto market, but if you can't compete because the big guys are offering fees at 10% of what you're charging, where's the customer going to go? They're going to go to where the fees are small.
But let's look at what Finance Minister, the set-asides and also the 100 billion rand in startups and SMEs, and that cooperative banks fit into that particular criteria, that there is hope, Zamo, in at least government extending that kind of assistance that you talk about.
Well, there could be hope, but I don't say there's hope. I don't buy into that. Because you've got to look at where the PIC invests. You look at where the direct funding institutions, be it IBC, National Empowerment Fund, look at how they operate. At times you find that it's a lot easier to go, if you've got a transaction, you find it's a lot easier to go to a commercial bank than it is to go to a direct funding institution. Because you get there and you're not going to get the same assistance. So at the end of the day, this goes back to government. Government needs to go out of its way to ensure that it fulfills the mandate of bringing the majority of the people into the economy. Now, without capital and access to capital, you're not going to go anywhere. It's just like the other day when you're talking about the interest rate. The more money you have, the lower the interest. But if you are poor, you pay interest of up to 26, 32%.
But what difference does it make as well in transformation? I had to break your word, in that if you, say a black bank still uses the security of or infrastructure of the big four, it's not truly transformed in that sense because it's still dependent on the means of production or the ability to trade based on established business.
I think that's where the cooperative banking legislation failed. The legislation was created to enable emerging sort of groupings of people as well as cooperatives that wanted to actually bank together. But the challenge became, where will the cooperatives find their technology platform and how are banks going to actually interface them into the banking mainframe infrastructure? And that became actually a huge problem because, yes, you only need 240,000 to start a cooperative bank. That is the requirement. The license will be provided through the processes that you will follow if you have the securitization of 240,000. All right? With the 240,000, it was expected that cooperative banks will emerge. But the challenge became the technology platform. There were other banks that were actually quite good, which had platform, but were still tied back to the big four at the time, who were controlling the banking SaaS switch in South Africa. So the challenge of transformation is not just we have passed the legislation that says there must be transformation. It's actually government enforcing a follow-through and flow-through process to say, here from the legislation, how do we see that legislation being implemented? What are the actually blockages throughout the way? What is the red tape that is required to be removed? Currently, to own a banking license in South Africa, you need 240 plus or millions as a one entity. So if you want to have a banking license, you need 240 million plus capital, which must be given. Plus, again, you must have another security cache of operational security so that you're not going to go out without being liquid. So the requirements to set up some of these licensing processes are quite impossible and do not allow for black participants and entrants to get into the market. For instance, I want to start an SME going into a banking sector, and I want to be a banker. You know, and in the banking sector, I want to provide 1,000 people with banking services that are quite unique. What are the chances for your services to succeed? One, the barrier is licensing. Secondly, the capital requirement. Thirdly, the infrastructure access, not just purchasing as well as procuring infrastructure, getting access to the current mainframe of the current big four, big five banks.
Yeah.
They would not just allow you.
How has the situation even been complicated even further or made more difficult for new entrants, Zamo, in the sense that banking services have now been extended to the retail sector where you can even purchase an airline ticket or whatever it is with your store card?
Well, I don't think that's that much of a. I think that's just giving access to services and trying to make it convenient for customers. Because when you actually look at the retailers, at the back end, there is one of the big four, big five that is there running on, and they are running on their platform. So that is just a continued domination in how they are integrating the businesses, the very same monopoly that you find. I mean, if you look at the supermarket industry in this country, it's also a monopoly. So it's just the monopolies backing each other up. At the end of the day, as Mr. Nchabaleng was saying, is that this goes back to government to actually look at what is the cause and effect of their legislation in terms of how it applies itself. I mean, I know that they had a high-level panel discussion that ended up saying that no, in the Gonyama Trust Act needs to be dissolved and land taken and given to the people. Then perhaps it also government needs to go and take the same high-level panel out into the country and look into the realities of what is actually going on. Why are we not seeing any development? Why? I mean, government itself, I'm aware that Itala has attempted to apply for a banking license. The South African Post Office has attempted to apply for a banking license. Even government itself is struggling to get banking licenses. Why is that? Why is it that in a country that is majority black, you do not have a strong black bank?
Yeah, but maybe it's, are we more all talk and very little action, as if we're saying by the sheer numbers and to deconcentrate the financial sector, there is at least a VBS bank, and we should put our money where our mouths are in walking the talk, so to speak, excuse the cliche, and move the accounts from the other big four.
I agree, you're right. But I will speak from a personal perspective. At the end of the day, can VBS Bank compete with the other banks? And competition goes back down to, it goes down to the fee. I am not going to move to a bank. If I'm currently paying 50 Rand in monthly fee, I'm not going to move to a bank that is going to charge me 200 Rands purely just because it's black. Because I need that 150 Rands, because in any case you are being squeezed. So at the end of the day, the question is, how does VBS grow itself in such a way that it is able to compete with the fees of all these other banks? Does it have the buffer room to actually drop its fees to the floor? I mean, VBS Bank is not running on its own platform. The very same thing that Mr. Ntshavheng was stating right now, that it is hard to get your own technology and to get into the system. So you end up piggybacking on one of the big banks.
But isn't that because it's also lack of support, if you will, from extending their market share with having more people signing up as clients?
Well, that is why I say it goes back to our government. Our government could take a position. I mean, a number of years ago, I remember one of the banks started taking adverts against the government. At the time, former President Mbeki threatened that bank with a simple thing: continue advertising against me and I will withdraw my business. The adverts were gone within the same day. At the end of the day, government needs to understand that it is in power. And when you are in power, you do not, yes, negotiation is great, but when the power lies with you, at times you need to use that power. I found it totally laughable last year that Minister Gigaba went all the way to Parliament to say that one of the auditing firms had actually put a squeeze on his department, and he was still going to go and report them to a regulator which is dominated by the very same big company. That is just a joke. They should have just simply gone and blacklisted that particular company from doing work with government. Because I know that if it had been a black company, there would have been no discussion. They would no longer be trading within this country. KPMG, it was found to have done whatever. The worst thing that happened to KPMG, all that happened is Sasfin Bank, which I believe pays about 12 million Rands a year in fees, was the only one to cancel his contract with KPMG. KPMG couldn't even.
As I was just saying on the line, Adil, I mean, what catastrophe would happen if, KPMG, for example, because we heard from the Reserve Bank, I beg your pardon, saying that it is too big to fall, and this would again destabilize the economy.
I think
as as an example, but we can talk the same about the banks.
No, I think the Reserve Bank was protecting interest there. I mean, they were not honest with the facts. There are many auditing firms that on a daily basis merge with other auditing firms. We know that Gobodo has just merged now with Grant Thornton. What was the catastrophe in that? What happened in the auditing firm space when there was that merger happening? So to say that there will be, yes, at the workers level, they might be affected as workers in terms of losing jobs if a firm had to fail, for instance, in the KPMG space. But KPMG's losses of revenue is not a catastrophe in the South African economy point of view, because the same revenue that is deriving it from the South African government primarily and from the South African economy primarily, secondarily. So some of these issues, when we get told that if this is going to happen, for instance, on the too big to fail, like in the KPMG space, we were actually lied to. We should actually have taken the governor to task and saying, tell us the truth. What are your facts when you say that KPMG? And how do you know? Because you're not even running KPMG as an institution.
Just run it straight, please.
You see, so some of these issues that we're sitting with, sometimes we get given misfacts. And because South Africans are by nature trusting and they actually are much more amenable to be given any information, we get to understand it. The biggest problem currently right now in transformation is sitting at the South African Reserve Bank. And we must face the fact. The South African Reserve Bank protects the interests of the four main banks, including the other, for instance, the Capitec as well as the BidVest Bank that are currently enjoying the space in the market. And Discovery, which has just been given. And the other two, they're not really going to be that significant. I mean, we're not looking at a massive change in the banking sector right now. There's still going to be a monopoly which is run on an oligopoly basis and everything. So we need to I
hope next time we'll be talking about innovation or presentations or whatever it is that we can do to transform the economy. But Adil, as always, it's appreciated. Adil Ntshavheng from Transform RSA as the president, and Zamo Madlala from the Radical Economic Transformation Coalition.